Good afternoon, brothers and sisters, and welcome once again to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show. I'm your weekly host, Brother James Muhammad, and I'm honored to have on the show this afternoon. Thank Allah for modern technology. I have my brother, student minister of the Honorable Minister Farrakhan from the mighty Mosque Number 1 in Detroit, Michigan, Brother Minister Troy. Good afternoon. Welcome to the show, my brother.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you, Brother James, for allowing us to be on such a magnificent show and giving us the ability to speak to those who would listen. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have his helper in the cause of truth in the prison reform ministry, Brother Carl 3X. Good afternoon, brother, and welcome to the show also.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Thank you very much for welcoming me also into your program and into the homes of those who are listening. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Well, brothers, first of all, once again, thank you for coming on the show. I try to dedicate once a month a show dedicated to the prison reform ministry. So my brothers who are incarcerated, our young ladies who are incarcerated, I want them to know that we didn't forget about them. And we know that the Nation of Islam has one of the most successful prison reform ministry in the world, I must say. So I am honored to have you on the show. Before we get started, I'd like to share with you some words of the Honorable Mr. Farrakhan as it relates to the prison reform ministry. And he stated, true prison reform starts with the enlightenment of who the inmate is in reality, and not what he or she has become due to circumstances. True prison reform reconnects the soul to its creator and begins to provide those human needs. And then we see a change in attitude in the inmate that leads to behavior change. That's a beautiful statement.
Yes, sir.
Brother Minister Troy, what is your relationship with the prison reform ministry, and how did you get introduced to the Nation of Islam prison reform ministry?
Well, praise be to Allah, man. I was in prison. And while in prison, I was always, looking and seeing what was going on. And it was a group of men in the prison who seemed cleaner than the rest, who seemed more disciplined than the rest, who seemed a bit more laid back, but smarter than the rest. And that group was the Nation of Islam study group inside the prison that I was in. I was in a prison where the age range was from 17 to 21, and everyone who was in the prison had over 20 years on their sentence to do. So it was a very serious and a rough spot, but that group of men, they always caught my attention. But one day, I was sitting in my cell, and the whole unit was quiet on that day. And usually when the unit is quiet, they're watching some women on TV, something like that, or something very significant has happened. This day, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was on the Phil Donahue show, and everybody was tuned in. And I tuned in myself, and that was my first time laying my eyes on him. I'd heard Public Enemy when they said Farrakhan's a prophet that I think you ought to listen to, but I'd never seen the man. And I saw this beautiful man with such articulation and such knowledge and wisdom, and how he controlled all around him with the words that he spoke from his mouth. I'd come out of a world where you needed strength or a gun to show power. But I saw a man in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on that day who showed power with the word, man. And it really turned me on to the point where I said, man, I got to hear some more of this. Then I found out that those brothers that I'd been watching, that disciplined group of brothers, were part of those who followed the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, I immediately put a request in to come on over and hear what they had to say. And I've been a part of the Nation of Islam ever since.
Wow, beautiful. Now, I started tapping my heels on the floor. I felt a little Holy Ghost just a few minutes ago. Beautiful, bro. I love the testimony. And while you were speaking, my mind went all the way back to Oakland, California.
Mm-hmm.
Jabril Muhammad was speaking in the minister's class one time when he was in Oakland. And he said, we don't testify enough.
Mm-hmm.
He said, some of
Yes,
our
sir.
testimony will save lives. So
You're right.
I'm actually listening at your testimony. I'm saying, man, I can't wait to play this to the brothers in prison. So I thank you for such a beautiful testimony, my brother. Brother Carl 3A,
Yes, sir.
my brother, how did you get introduced to the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry that caused you want to help go into the prison?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Like the brother, our brother, beloved minister, I noticed brothers that were inside that were different from the rest. But me being a student of the Church and God in Christ, what drew me, or what brought me around the brothers was my cousin, who was in the Nation inside, and I just became familiar with the brothers. It was one day I was sitting at the table, and I was still eating the hog at the time, but I stopped that day when the brothers looked at me and they educated me. But what really got me was, I was really brought to a low point in my life. My wife left me, my children, she took the children and everything. And I went to a meeting, and there was a brother named Lee Muhammad who came in and spoke about how Allah will strip everything that you put on a pedestal before him until you submit. And it was like I was the only person in the room that he was speaking to. That night I went back to my cell. I prayed the best way I knew how, and I said, Allah, I'm going to give you an honest try. And that was in July of 1996. And I never looked back from that point on, because once I actually submitted and began to apply these teachings and began to see how they actually worked in my life, the teachings began to bear witness to me, and I began to bear witness to others as the truth to them. And so from 1996 until today, I've made a pledge, because along the way, I met brothers who came into the system. I met brothers inside the system. And I would always tell brothers that when I come home, I'm going to help. I'm going to help. And as soon as I came home, I ran straight to the mosque. I even told Minister Troy, when I got down to maybe a year, brother, I want to come home and I want to join and help. And the brother said, it's a spot here if you're willing to work. And I've been ever since.
Yes, sir.
Oh, beautiful, brothers. Now, Brother Troy and Brother Carl, there was a transition. You went from being reformed to becoming a reformer. Tell us about that transition and the type of difficulties that you were faced with. And I know, you're incarcerated. It's not easy to practice Islam in prison, because I was just banned from Cummins prison for teaching the black man is the original man. And I know some prisons won't allow you to bring this book message to the black man. Tell us about that transition, brother, how you go from being reformed to becoming a reformer. By Allah's permission.
I mean, we stay in a state of being reformed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of understanding the process, because when brothers and sisters see you, that you're still in the process, like you said, you can't wait to show this video to those who are incarcerated. They have to see, sometimes they have to see that we're in the process with them. So it's, that reform is something that we got to go through every day. And being in the prison system, it was a bit more difficult. I find it a bit more difficult out here, though, in reflection, right? Because the prison is like a glass house. If you say, like Carl just said, he was eating pork, everybody know you eating it right in there, because we all go to dinner together. Everybody knows if you're smoking cigarettes or if you're doing the things that, we, based upon a restrictive law of Islam, we didn't do. So, it has helped me coming from that space to be able to talk to people that is now where I was at before I accepted. You know what I mean? It helps me to relate to them better. It helps me to understand them better, you know, and it you know, it really inspires a lot when they talk to me and they find out the road that I have traveled. I think the best testament that we can give to the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is that, you know, nobody can tell by looking at you today that you ever served a day in prison.
That's right.
So, you know, it's been a journey, man, but it's been a fulfilling journey, man, and I'm so thankful for the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Okay, I heard something. I can't let you get away with it, but I'm about to go Oprah Winfrey on you. You left prison, came home.
Yes.
And I tell the brothers in prison, sometimes it's easier to be a incarcerated Muslim. Share with us your testimony and your trial. So when you came out, that gravitational pull of Satan whirled on you. What type of challenges did you face? Because I want these brothers to understand, because they see you and it looks easy by looking at you. But was it an easy process making that transition?
No, it's not an easy process. It's a process you got to wake up and decide on daily. You know, the first day I was home, it was a blessing to be home. But, you know, you come home, you got 5 or 6 different women trying to holler at you. You know, outside of that, you know, I had a friend who I was in, real close friend before I went to prison. You know, the first thing he offered me was the ability to make $10,000
back into the game.
Somebody. Yeah, killing somebody, you know? And, you know, all of these things are offered. But if it wasn't for me having the foundation I was given by the teachings, man, I could very well fall back into that.
Wow.
And I can see where a lot of our brothers and our sisters fall back into the same thing because they haven't, you know, the mind hasn't been renewed. Like the minister said about true prison reform being the light, the enlightenment of who the inmate is. And if you don't know that, you fall right back into the use and the abuse that was happening to you before you even came to prison. You know, so it's a rough road climbing on the outside, because when you're on the inside, it's like what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said about Malcolm X. You know, as long as you got that hedge around you, you know, it's a bit easier to do the things that you promising yourself you're going to do. But when you get out, you get offered so many different roads, man. It becomes a bit more difficult.
Okay, Brother Carl, Rex,
Yes,
you made that transition, the difficulty factors that you had to face. How long did it take you to get to the mosque and get into the process and finish the process?
Well, I went to the mosque the first Sunday I was home. And I was in processing class the very next day, that Monday's class for processing. And I stayed in the class during the whole process. So what I've been telling the men that I've been talking to is that, to me, the most critical time for you to get into the class is when you first come home, because you're trying to get your life together, but it's before you get into work, it's before you get into a routine. And a lot of people tend to wait until after they get into the routine and then want to try to come back, but then it's too late, because now you're caught up in, I'm not gonna say too late, they get caught up in life and it's harder to come back to the class. Whereas for me, it was easier to go right into the class, write my letters, go through the processing, while at the same time getting my driver's license, all of my identification together, getting my footing set. And then once I got into the workforce, that part of writing my letter, but that part of reciting and memorizing, that part was already done. But it was something that the biggest challenge, one of the challenges is family. For 27 years, I was gone. And so for 27 years, my children had to grow up without a father. For 27 years, my mother had to live without her son, my siblings. And so when I came home, one of the biggest challenges I had was people vying for my time. and you're only one person because you want to get to work, you want to spend time with your family, your children, all of those good things, and you want to devote time to the mosque. But I think the thing that brought me peace was two people, and I got to keep going back to Student Minister Troy. Student Minister Troy and Minister Ishmael. Student Minister Troy took me to go see Minister Ishmael in Chicago. And Student Minister Ishmael, after speaking to a group of us who had just come home, he came over and he said, keep an eye on this one because he's listening attentively. And then he told me, he said, I want you to remember this. He said, I want you to remember God first, you second, family, then mosque. And he said, if you can find a balance in that, then he said, then we can have a strong nation. And ever since he said, I took those to heart, and that's what I live by. God first, me second, family, then God. Then the mosque, because the family is the foundation of the mosque.
Beautiful, brother. Brother Minister Troy, you went through a transition, but you end up in the ministry class. Then you became the minister over mosque number 1. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of weight to carry. Did prison prepare you for this type of work? And what effect does prison have on the ministry as it relates to our people?
Yes, sir. When I reflect on it all, man, and we just came into a new year, and the minister has reminded us about the value of reflection. When I reflect over my life, man, I can only come to that famous poem called Footprints in the Sand. When it talks about 2 sets of footprints, and then you see 1 set of footprints, and you ask, why, God, did you forsake me, or did you leave me? And he says, at that time I carried you. So I can look at my entire life as a preparation for where I am today, because I can't articulate how I got into the position that I am today, the very special position of being the student minister representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in the city of Detroit, where the Nation of Islam first began. That wasn't in my plan. It was never in my plan. You come out, I had great student ministers before me, Dawood Muhammad, who was a great student minister. Then Minister Rasul Muhammad, one of the sons of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, comes back to Detroit. And, my hope was just to assist him and help him in all that he was doing. Unfortunately, he, due to health reasons, had to step away. And even at that time, it wasn't my intent to be the student minister. But Allah, we plan, and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. So I ended up there. And I can see now how I can extract on a lot of the things that I learned during my time of incarceration that are useful today. The discipline you learn, the patience you learn, the ability to really analyze a thing, because in there you're learning, you don't even realize you're learning. You got to write a letter to somebody, then you got to wait a week for a letter to come back. You know what I mean? So you're learning patience, and you're learning, you got to wait on your court papers, and so it's a lot of learning and developing that we did in there that prepared us for this time right now. It's like, even during the COVID-19, when people had to stay in. I locked up 13 years. That didn't bother me in any way, and Brother Carl didn't bother him in any way. So, I think I can look back over my life in general and see how it prepared me for today, man. So I'm just thankful to Allah to be where I am, to be an example of how these teachings, they don't discriminate. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan knows my history. That didn't prevent him from allowing to be the minister over his mosque. When I saw Minister Abdullah Muhammad as the representative of prison reform ministry, and I found out that he had been incarcerated. It let me know that, it's no discrimination there.
Right.
And they'll an opportunity and give us a chance to write a whole new page. And I've had that opportunity. It's a blessed opportunity, man. And I'm just enjoying life daily, man, based upon these teachings and being able to deal with anything that comes before me.
Praise you due to Allah, brother. For those who are just now tuning in to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show, I'm your weekly host, Brother James Muhammad, and I have on the show with me this afternoon as we discuss true prison reform, the Nation of Islam, student minister Troy Muhammad, mighty Mosque number 1, Michigan, and his aide and student minister in the prison reform, Brother Carl 3X. Brothers, once again, thank you for coming on the show. Now, as you were speaking, brother, I remember the words of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan when I believe he was in Cook County. He said, sometimes God puts you in a vice so he can work on you. And I'm thinking, I said, like God was after these two brothers all along. They just didn't listen. And he want to put them in a place where he can prepare them to do a work for him. And I heard you speaking one day, I believe on social media, and you was speaking about when you came home from prison and the chances that was offered to you. And the first thing came to my mind now, I've been teaching in the prison for over 25 years. I said, damn, that brother was in prison. I made my mind, I need him on the show to give his testimony because I know how a testimony can free the minds of our people that are incarcerated. So now, the Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan stated, he said, when we go into the prison, we should teach self-improvement basis for
yes, sir. That's
right. Study guide, excuse me. Was you introduced to this study guide when you was incarcerated, and what effect did it have on your life? We'll start, brother Carl.
Yes, sir. Actually, that was one of the first things that was outside of the message of the black man that was introduced to me. And it wasn't until I really sincerely got into the study guides, and that would be in 1996, that I began to see and began to start that process of understanding mixed feeling and controversy, building human potential, struggle for balance, overcoming difficulty, those key books. But then as you grow into teachings, you begin to understand a lot more, the characteristics of humility, the law of God. Those became very valuable to me, especially when you're dealing with one another. But yes, those books were instrumental and still are today very instrumental in my growth and development, and the growth and development of the men that are around me. Something written, 1985, still relevant today and onward. It's got to be God, brother.
Brother, student minister Troy. Now I hear you teaching from this study guide from the Rosh.
That's what you got to teach, brother. I in my study and analyzing that self-improvement lecture, I feel that that's one of the greatest lectures, if not the greatest lecture in the history of the world, man. If you study that lecture, you could take that lecture and give it to any human being, no matter what color they are, no matter what race, no matter what gender. That lecture can fit over any situation and any person, any circumstance, man. And self-improvement, you begin to learn, that this whole study guide series is about you. Don't have nothing to do with anybody else, man. And I think that's the mistake we sometimes make. We get it and we go out and try to, we want to teach it to everybody.
Say it again.
But it's about us. It's about me. It's about you unfolding, man, and learning who we really are, because that's the only person we truly have control over is the self. We can teach all day, but we don't have the ability to make the person change. It's the self's decision to change. So self-improvement being the basis of community development. If I could get into that study guide and just stay there, don't look up to teach everybody else, but just open up that book and stay there, brother. It can help me develop the God potential that each of us have inside of us.
Beautiful.
So I recommend that.
Now, there are certain prisons that bans message to the black man.
A lot of them.
I was in Cummins Prison. I was teaching from the Self-Improvement Study Guide. And I began to teach on the black man as the original man. Then I received a call from the brothers in prison stating that chaplain stated that that brother won't be coming back. And I was like, why? Because I stay away from the black and white issues. I work on self-improvement. We know, as he say, enlightening enlightenment and enlightening the inmate on who he is in reality. So we have to teach who we are. But I found out, but that statement alone, that the black man is the original man, it grabs the brothers, calls them now to begin to study themselves and fall in love with themselves. But on the other hand, it brings about a discipline to the brothers in prison that the prison don't like.
Right.
And it's a threat because once you have the knowledge of self, then it gives you the knowledge of all those who are around you, right? And that kind of loses authority over you. You know who you are and you know who they are. So, you know, there was a lot of going back and forth and going back and forth. So they decided, said, well, brother, you can come back, but just don't make that statement. Well, I don't have to really make that statement because this book is filled with statements that we can make. So
that's right.
Understand the importance of this study guide. And when the minister stated, this is the only thing we need to teach when we go into the prison. So, brother, let me ask you a quick question also, brother. Both of you guys are married, right? And I must say,
yes, sir.
Successful. I met my brother at the Prison Reform Banquet. I met his beautiful wife. And the reason why I bring that up, because family is everything. But when those who come out of prison, they have to see an image. We're taught that unlike attract and attract repel. I see such an attractive picture right here that our people can see and get hope. Give us a few words of inspiration for my brothers and sisters that are in prison. Brother Student Minister Troy.
Well, I mean, when I came out of prison, brother, I didn't have anything.
Wow.
You know, fresh. You know, many don't know that I was sent to prison based on shooting a police officer, which is a very serious crime. And I was given 25 to 50 years for that. But based upon the teachings that I accepted, which was the teachings of the Nation of Islam, it made me reform my habits. It made me example as an inmate. You know, so when I went back to court, man, I was looking so clean and decent. I had gotten to college. I had gotten, you know, finished my schooling and did all the things that was available to us in the prison. So that teaching helped me get out because, you know, the judge, when they saw me, the judge said, "You a perfect example of reform. So I'm going to give you a reduction." And she gave me a reduction of time from 25 to 50 to 5 to 10. So they made, you know, the parole board maxed me out at the 10 plus the 2 that I had to do for the gun charge. But, you know, that gave me a reduction. But I came out of that prison. You know, both my parents who raised me had passed away. I didn't really have any foundation. But, you know, right now, I've been married 22 years. I have 4 children, all of them in college or finished college. 2 have finished college. 1 is in the military. And my son is starting his first year of college. You know, I've never wanted for anything. I don't know what a day of hunger feels like. My taking care of all the bills I paid, man. It's a blessed thing. And I attribute it to the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the foundation and guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It gave me the tools that I needed to maneuver through life successfully. And like I said, man, married all this time now. I don't have children in other houses. They all in this house.
Go ahead.
So, and it's just a wonderful thing, man, to look at after having, you know, being taken from the bottom. You know, it's a beautiful thing and it's a blessing.
Brother, I have to have a public service announcement. I want to go back to that judge.
Mhm.
He said, what to you?
He said, "You are the perfect example of reform." You know, and like I said, I shot a police officer, man. That's something you don't come back from. So to get that, you know, was a blessing. And then another blessing that I can mention, you know, when you go to prison, you get what's called a pre-sentence report. And on this report, the prosecutor's name is on it. The sheriff's name is on it. Well, at the time, the sheriff was a man named Warren Evans, who I work with every day today. The prosecutor was Mike Duggan, who was the mayor of the city of Detroit now. Um, you know, all of these people come to me now for help and guidance, not knowing that their names was on the paperwork that sent me to prison.
Come on, come on, come on. Wow. All praises due
So
to him.
God turns it around, man.
He makes a way out of no way, huh?
I would tell anybody, man, just, you know, stay faithful and commit yourself, man, and know that God is real and God is present.
Beautiful. All right, my brother. Brother Carl, you have to come with a testimony to top that one now.
Oh, how you gonna have me come by high?
I talked to you sitting at the table, so I know you have a testimony.
Well, not
Yes,
me
sir.
and him was in there together, so we
Now I didn't know that.
Yes, sir. I rode into a place where he was the study group coordinator, and it was at that location that I learned how a study group was supposed to be run, and how you were supposed to treat each other as brothers.
Wow.
And I took that model, and I used that model for the remaining 21 years that I was incarcerated, and helped other brothers transition from prison into the mosque. And so, I was with the brother, and the brother challenged us. You know, I'll never forget my first assignment from him, which was to write a report on The Lion King. And we all had to go back and watch The Lion King and write a report on The Lion King. That's what we saw. And that showed me, I learned a lot from that movie, but I learned a lot of detail from the brother. And it always carried over with me, you know, over time. But to come back to the testimony side of it, it was something that you said earlier about reform and transition. And I'm always advocating that it's hard being a light in the midst of all this darkness. And inside a prison, you're surrounded by a lot of darkness. But then when you transition out into society, it's just as much darkness. And so you have to fight even harder to be a light in the midst of all of it. But I think prison, and it was something else that you had said about God sitting you down. You know, before I went to prison, there were many people that I believe Allah put in my life trying to warn me, but I didn't listen. And so as you stated, I had to be set down so that I could hear what Allah was saying. And there are many who are sitting incarcerated right now who don't recognize God set them down for them to listen and observe their circumstances. And if you listen and observe your circumstances and begin to apply these teachings, which help transform my life, that help make me into this man that you see today, just as the brother said, you know, even though I did 27 years, I used to sit up there and say a lot, why do I need to do all this time? I'm ready. But then I begin to understand it's not about me, it's about those people who still need to learn something from me. And so when Allah saw fit to release me, then that's when it was. But who was it that needed my help during that time frame that Allah wanted me to serve, who wanted me to be an example for someone else in their transition? So in that transition of coming home, sitting there, I realized that it wasn't about me. It's about my service to Allah. It's my service to everyone else that's around me. But the teachings just helped reinforce in me who I was, who I am. Like you said, I'm the original man. And it was that statement of understanding that if I'm the original man and making the owner, the cream, and the planet of the God of the universe, then what else am I capable of doing? Seeing a young brother named Nuri Muhammad at the age of 17 in the final call, 17, 18, I believe it was, in the ministry, had a barbershop. I think it was a barbershop, the mosque. And I was just saying to myself, wow, look at the power in that brother. I'll never forget that final call. But it was things like that that helped transition me. And so those brothers and sisters that are incarcerated who are putting in work on themselves, as difficult as it is, you still have to be a light in the midst of darkness, inside as well as out. And the challenges that you're confronted with while you're incarcerated are going to be multiplied by 10 when you come out. But Allah is preparing you for something much greater, much bigger than what you're thinking.
Beautiful, brother.
Reform.
Yes, brother, when I met you at the prison reform.
Now, let me say,
go ahead, brother.
My brother, he's being very humble, man.
I was going to say the same. He being a little humble.
he served all that time, man. And he has come out here, man. He's a wonderful example. And that's why I put him in charge of the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry in Detroit. He's married now. He has his own trucking company.
Mm-hmm.
About one truck.
Come on.
What I mean? Brother has trucks across the road all over the country. You know what I mean? And this is a man who did all that time in prison, man, to turn his life around and now being able to employ others and help others and be an example for others, man. That's a blessed testimony, man. And it's a valuable thing, man. We got brothers that's been out here for 25 years who can't put two nickels together. But this brother got out of prison after all that time, over 20 years, man. And pulled himself up and got himself together and got organized and applied that teaching of self-improvement, man, and went on to take on this business, man, expand this business. He's turning it now into a truck driving school as well. It's a great brother right there. He's just really being humble right now, I think, because his student minister's on the phone with him.
Don't worry, I'm about to check him on that too.
You got it.
I think you checked him, because when I sat at dinner with him at the Prison Reform Gala, he began to share his business with me. And I'm like, wow, I need this brother's testimony. So we exchanged numbers. Because the reason why that testimony is so important, because here in Memphis, when they come home, they go from temp service to another temp service. Work 90 days, and their line said, well, we're going to bring you on permanent and we're going to give you benefits. But when they get to that 90 days, then they'll let go.
Right.
They need to know they can come out and do for self.
Yes, sir.
And they need to see an example of doing for self, being married. Because sometimes all it takes is a picture.
Yes, sir.
And that's why, brother, I'm so excited about you all coming on the show. Brothers, I am so honored to be among you. I want to get some closing statements from you, brothers, and some encouragement for our brothers and sisters and our parents, because my brother was locked up for approximately 17 years for committing murder. And I remember watching the pain on my mother and going to court with her and things like that. And that patience. And it's something about when everybody else give up on you, mother's going to be there.
They're going to be there, brother.
Gonna be there. Mother going to be there and God's going to be there. You might not recognize God, but you're going to recognize mother. So I'm going to start with you, Brother Carl, and then we'll close out with you, Brother Student Minister Troy.
So I guess my closing comments would be that the statement, do for self or suffer the consequences, is a very valuable statement that it's a theory to those who hear it, but as I understand it, practice refines it. And unless you actually take the time to actually apply these teachings and let these teachings show you what they can do for you. Sister Ava Muhammad, may Allah be pleased with us, said that we can set ourselves in heaven in no limit of time. And that's through application. So for me, to anyone that's listening, I'm humbled by, the fact that, yes, I am married. I do have a couple of businesses that that are being run, but all praise is due to Allah in the person of Master Fard Muhammad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in these teachings that we have that put me in a position to do it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to believe in what you're learning and applying what you're learning and step out on faith that those lessons that you're learning, those things that you're hearing, those things that you're being taught are actually real. They're tangible. They're for you. Allah put these things, these teachings there for you. And you just have to reach out, grab hold of it, and take advantage of it. And that's all I did from day one. I wasn't going to let go of what brought me to where I am today. The teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is given to us through the Honorable Mirza Louis Farrakhan today. Gotta love it, brother.
Thank you, my brother, for coming on the show. Brother,
Thank you for having me.
Muhammad, I thank Allah for the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. You don't get it wrong. I thank you, brother, for your patience. I thank you for your long suffering. I thank Allah for putting you in that vice so we can benefit from whatever you learned through your trials and your tribulation, my brother. We're going to close out with you, my brother, but you got to come back. You all have to come back because...
Oh, we come back anytime, brother. Pray.
I'm seeing myself getting this to the brothers in prison, and I'm seeing their response.
Yes, sir. Well, we'll come back anytime for that, brother. Because the same way we were touched, we want to help others get that same word, that same message, man. And the message is, it's not where you are at currently, but where you have the potential to go. You know what I mean? That position that you're in, it doesn't define you. You define you. And that's part of the teachings of who is the original man. Who is God, because the teachings in that book, Message to the Black Man, that they don't want in there, it puts power in your hands to actually change your condition. You know what I mean? So we have many brothers who were sentenced to life in prison, but who now stand in the mosque with us, man, because they didn't accept that as their sentence. They allowed God to give them a sentence, and that wasn't the sentence that God gave them. And all they had to do was put in the work, go in them law libraries, figure the thing out to get themselves out. And that's how it works, So, you quoted the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan earlier, who said that true prison reform is the enlightenment of who the inmate is. I thought about that, and I realized that in one sense, we are inmates, because the minister said that America is a prison.
Come on.
So you have inmates to fear, inmates to loneliness, inmates to poverty, inmates to self-hatred, man. So prison doesn't just apply to physical bars, but, one who has no knowledge, his prison is ignorance. You know what I mean? One who has no understanding, his prison is enslavement to others. And we're suffering from all of that. One who has no spiritual knowledge is in prison to Satan. So we want to destroy this world. So we got to get self-knowledge. We got to get knowledge, wisdom, understanding, spiritual growth, man, so that we can break out of Satan's prison and break out of the physical prisons that lack puts us in. It's all in our hands. Self-improvement, he says, is the base for community development. That's a strong teaching because it puts the power right in your hands to improve yourself. And if you can do that, you can improve the community, man. We can do this thing, man. You got two brothers on this line and a whole nation of Islam of Malcolm X's, who have around and changed this thing around. Have a Minister Abdullah Muhammad who turned his life around, changed things around. You got so many examples around you, man, that you can look at in this nation of Islam that can be an inspiration to you. So please, man, never give up on yourself. Stay focused on getting out of the prison. And that prison applies not just to the physical prison, but the mental prisons as well, because sometimes it's the mental prisons that put us in the physical prisons. So let's get this thing together. Let's get ourselves together. Let's work on our own self-improvement and self-development. And Allah will unleash us from the prisons that we find ourselves trapped in.
Oh, great. You through, brother? We need you to make do those 3 questions and take acceptance too, my brother. But brother, you know you were speaking, and I was just sitting here thinking. I said, I thank Allah for the Honorable Minister Farrakhan for making us into little Christ, where we can go out and reform our people. And a lot of people are scared of that terminology.
Yes, sir.
When you go from being reformed to becoming a reformer and staying in that process, you know, Allah is using us. You know, and I'm from the Church of God in Christ too. We used to say, "Use me, Lord."
Mhm.
You know, so it's beautiful when we study the process, and I know the effect that this will have on our brothers and sisters that are incarcerated. So I thank you all for coming on the show. Now, because of social media now, modern technology, this can go worldwide. How
Yes,
can
sir.
they get in touch with you all now if they want to know more about the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry or come to the mosque there in Michigan?
Yes, sir. Well, of course, if you're in Detroit or Michigan, you know, Muhammad's Mosque number 19160 Evergreen, Detroit, Michigan is open for anybody to come on through, man, and get a word from the teachers of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Personally, you know, Troy Muhammad on Instagram, Troy Muhammad on Facebook, Troy Muhammad even on TikTok, you know, trying to get that word out to our brothers and sisters. But I can also communicate with you on those social media outlets as well. So inbox me, man. Let me know what's going on. And your brother will always try to be there with the response.
All right, well, brothers and sisters, to my mothers out there who have young men and women incarceration, hang in there. Nation of Islam is on your side.
And
Brothers,
to those mothers, real fast,
yes, sir, go ahead.
mention that, you know, Carl's mother lost him for over 20 years.
Yeah.
She was pained by that. But now today, she'll testify that she got about 20 sons in the mosque, brother. You know what I mean?
Beautiful, beautiful,
So,
beautiful.
you know, sacrificed that time and went through that pain. But today, brother, it's about 20 brothers, man. It's there for her and waiting on her and doing everything that she needs us to do, man. So
Could I go ahead?
now,
Sir.
yeah, go ahead, brother Carl.
I was just getting ready to say that for those brothers listening, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, my mother, my sisters, my siblings didn't know. They heard me talk about the teachings, but it wasn't until I came home and they actually started to see me that they began to start believing that my sisters and my mother now come to the mosque. My son, for the first time, came to the mosque 3 weeks ago. And my youngest son, that's in Memphis, I went to go visit him and I gave him words from the teachings. And he told me, he said, "Dad, I'm going to the mosque in Memphis, but I don't want you to tell him that I'm coming." And he went. All that because the teachings are being exemplified in the person. And all they have to do is be or live what they're learning, what they believe. And Allah will turn all that you think can't be turned in his favor, in your favor, in his direction. But I'm glad the brother said that because everybody in the mosque, they love my mother, they love my wife, they love my entire family. And like he said, not only does she have 20 sons, she has 20 plus daughters.
Yeah, it's the real deal, man. So I'm just saying that to the man, just be patient. And if you're patient, man, Allah will multiply that which you think you've lost. But it'll become actually a gain if you can stay patient and keep your faith in him.
Okay, now before we close out, behind every good man, there's a good woman. Y'all have to give a shout out to the wife. Because you looking good, but I know she dressed you. She put your tie together and all that.
Well, mine just went upstairs with my granddaughter, you know what I mean, to give me my space so I can do this interview in my office. So
Beautiful.
Somewhere in the household doing her thing.
Okay, I can tell she's been a great help in this transition too, as you go from being a reformer to help our people, my brother.
Well, they have to be because to do the work, man, you're not home. To your own, you out there helping children and young people, and your own young people miss out on that. So it's a very great sacrifice, man. And you have to have a special family to even understand the sacrifice. So I feel blessed to have the family that I have and to be able to continue to do the work that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan asked of me.
Okay. Brother Carl, we're going to close out with you because I know you want to get a shout out. I met your beautiful wife at the banquet also.
Yes. I cannot speak enough about my wife and her support and everything that I do. So I'm just grateful that Allah blessed me with her. He blessed me in many ways with my mother, Barbara, with her. I'm just grateful, brother, to have the family that I have and the support that I have, even from my brother Troy, Student Minister Troy, and our National Representative, Student Minister Abdullah Muhammad. So I'm just grateful, brother, to be blessed to be in a company of great people.
Brothers and sisters, thank you once again for tuning in to the Self-Improvement Basis for Community Development Talk Show every Monday night at 5:30 on Channel 17 Comcast Cable, also on Facebook and Instagram. So look us up and make sure you hear this message. You help the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry. Going to NOI.org. Thank you, brothers, once again. I am so filled with the spirit after hearing you all. I love you all. And until next time, we thank the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan for you. We leave you as we came before you in the nation. Words of peace. Assalamu alaikum.